And I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Niklas Blomberg, Director of the ELIXIR project. This is the major project in Europe for the life sciences, and he's going to be telling you about their very exciting work. The format is we'll have 3 speakers, and then we'll all come back up here for questions after the 3 speakers, so save your questions until the end. Niklas?
So thank you very much, David, for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation, Peter and you, and come here and speak. So what I'd like to describe in this talk is how we've really partnered and used, I think is perhaps the right word, used GA4GH as a driver to actually implement standardized data sharing in Europe, but also I think how we've contributed to the development of global standards. I really think it's been a very good partnership. And long may it continue. So good luck with the new strategy, Peter. So ELIXIR is a little bit of an odd beast. We are not a project, we're actually an infrastructure, and we were created by European, and we're funded by 20 European countries. Those are our member states, and we're there to drive and help to share data responsibly across Europe and to connect up the national investments in life science data management across Europe. And so we are meant to stick around for some time. We are an intergovernmental organization that are governed by our member states, and typically we are funded by the research councils in each of our countries. We do this by connecting what we call national nodes, but these are really national investments, long-term investment in data management infrastructure. And I think one of the early successes from the development of ELIXIR as a European infrastructure has really been to foster the realization in many countries that you need to organize yourselves nationally, and there have been structures being put in place nationally to help manage that data. The important part here really is that the nodes, our national infrastructures, they are funded nationally, and so they build on the national research priorities. ELIXIR is pan-life science, so it's not only health and biomedical. Of course, all of our nodes are very interested in health and biomedical, but after that it varies a lot. So for instance, our Norwegian colleagues are really leading on things like marine, aquaculture, fish genomics, while understandably the Swiss and the Czech Republic are a lot less interested in marine research. And I think that is just one of the diversities that we need to manage in a large European collaboratory. But I think what is important is that these nodes really provide a framework for long-term resource management, but they also provide a framework to have the conversation about responsible data sharing and how do you link up the technology with the policy and the standards. And I just show one example here is our Spanish colleagues, the Spanish Institute of Bioinformatics, and it's quite typical for many of the national nodes in the sense that it's a collaboratory in itself. It brings together the major institutes in Spain. It's coordinated out of the BSc in Barcelona, but then it brings together researchers at almost every Spanish university. And I think this is a great strength of our organization, is the fact that we can reach out to essentially every nook and cranny of European research. We have a Monday newsletter that reads about 650 people who are actively working in life science data sharing. So what are the challenges and why did we create this? And so the first life science data sharing is, of course, that the geographical distribution, we are not, and you all know this very well, we're not trying to get data from one big machine out to a lot of researchers in the way that you would do in many other sciences. You really have a many-to-many problem where people want to access data across very widespread geographies, in this case Europe, but actually the world. We have, of course, the challenges of access and governance of human data. This is a big topic in Europe right now with new legislation, pan-European data regulation coming into force next year. And while that regulation in itself is quite positive to data sharing and actually make provisions for research, I see Barta nodding, so that's reassuring. I think it provides, or it requires, a new model for governance in that it spells out very clearly what each institute and the data controller is responsible for. And to be able to share data in that perhaps more strict or clear regulatory landscape, I think we really need to work with our national partners. I think the last thing which is really important is that a lot of funders in US, worldwide, and certainly in Europe put an open data mandate on the researchers. And so researchers are asked to share data at the end of their project upon publication, and actually most of them don't really know how to do that. And I think it's a really important role for us as infrastructure is to help the researchers to do this in an easy way, but also in a controlled and responsible way. So how do we go about this? So what is that we're trying to do? So I think there are three components of this that are all really, really important. And so the first one is, of course, the technical standards, the technology that we need to do, and we need to have compatible technologies, and there's been some great examples here. The other one is the processes, the back office, the legal side, which I think boils down to building networks of trust. And so how can you trust researchers in other locations to access your data? And how can you, especially if we move into healthcare data, and we talked about it this morning, how do we actually put the support structures in place that help individual researchers to explain to their university lawyers that you can actually trust researchers at another university? It is possible to share data with them without going through a 10-year sort of legal nightmare for every DNA sequence you want to send to your collaborator. And I think that's, and I'll give some examples how we're building towards those networks of trust. And the last one, and we shouldn't really forget this, is the role of the reference archives, the gen banks, the nomenclature committees, the gene builds, those reference archives that really are the basis for a lot of the research. And while GA4GH perhaps is not directly involved in long-term support of them, that's something we feel very strongly about from ELIXIR, and we really try to work with the players to make sure that those reference archives stay around, because it's really the basis for all the annotation that follows. So what I thought I would do in the remaining minutes is just give you a few examples of how we've worked with the Global Alliance to start to put some of the building blocks, I think, for doing this in practice in place in Europe. I don't want to claim that we've solved it. I think we've taken some small steps towards a solution, but I hope we can contribute with some of the sort of fundamental infrastructure building blocks. One is the work we've done in what we call our compute platform, but this is really the e-infrastructure, cyber infrastructure services that underpins data sharing. And the big flagship there for us has been what we call AAI, so authorization and authentication infrastructure, a shared login that cuts across boundaries in Europe. So everything we do is international, is transnational, and we have to work with institutes that in up to 20 countries. So I'll say a bit more about that. We've also been looking at data transfer services. So things like HTS-GET, which is launched today, but also other services that help the researchers to get access to the reference data and pull that down to the local compute environment or the national cloud environment. And actually many of our nodes, if not to say most of our national nodes, have quite large investments right now in what they call national infrastructure or national clouds for life science. And so what we are trying, and that's the yellow blob, we're really trying to get these clouds to work together, make sure that there are common standards and way of deploying, say, containers or other tool and workflows in a similar fashion in these clouds. And that will, of course, drive the data or the tools to data paradigm. The AI service really has been at the core of this. And so currently we have about 500 institute identity providers hooked up into that across Europe. And I think I'm actually quite pleased we have even 2 private companies hooked up into the infrastructure that act as cloud brokers nationally. And so we start to see the rollout and use of this in practice. And I think that is really the basis for accepting the fact, as you and others alluded to this morning, that much of the sensitive data will be stored nationally. We have to move towards a federated model. And if you move toward a federated model, it's not about finding the needle in the haystack, it's about finding the needle in a set of distributed haystacks. And so, so the find and access component is really where we have put our focus. And I think this is where the Beacon network have fitted in very well. And so we've been using the Beacon, but also other services to drive data access. Central to our approach has been the EGA, so the European Genome Phenome Archive. That's a collaborative project between the EBI in Kingston and the Spanish Center for Genome Regulation in Barcelona. And what we are now doing is roping in many of our national partners into that EGA network and use that as the basis for this federated data sharing. And all of this has been underpinned by GA4GH standards, so that's really core to that infrastructure for us. So just one example here is that we've helped to light beacons with national cohorts. Last year, or up until mid this year, we've lit them in 7 of the national cohorts, so these are national genome projects. Most of these are public, not all, but many of them are public. And so we've been able to essentially help to roll out these standards in a number of countries. I think the challenge that we've noticed is the fact that a lot of this data can't be published openly. You need to have some sort of registered access. And we've been very active working with the GA4GH working group on registered access and how you control access to a group of bona fide researchers. And I think there are some papers about to be published in this space, and I think that's been another really good collaboration. And so I think where we're moving towards, and this will be tested by the end of the year actually, is to have public data sets, registered data sets, and controlled access data sets. And depending on your permissions, which is attached to your role in our single sign-on infrastructure, you will be able to access different beacons. And so within the metadata profile of each beacon, it also says, tells you about the access. And so, for instance, if your access is public, you would only see the green beacons. If you issue the same query as a registered access user, you would see 2 additional beacons. And actually, if you have access to a specific set of data sets after applying for permissions, then you see an additional broader set of beacons. And I think it's, while I think we all like to see as much as possible in the green boxes, I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that there will be yellow and red boxes in the world, and we need to manage that. But I'm very happy to say that many of our national cohorts have elected to put the aggregate data into the green boxes, and I think that is really another, so this is really a tool to promote that open data sharing. I just want to make a plug, and I know there was a talk yesterday by Michael Bordis. We've also been involved in developing and deepening the GA4GH metadata schema into something that's called Beacon Plus. I won't have time to talk about this in detail. Michael is here in the audience. I encourage you to talk to him. But I think this is a way of describing richer data, for instance, in oncology, where you can cover things like copy number variants. And actually, we do see some interest from oncology centers to use this as a way of sharing data within a set of clinical oncology centers. So I think this is, again, the conversations within GA4GH has really helped us to drive towards global metadata schemas. So starting to sum this up, I think GA4GH has really been helpful to anchor what we wanted to do anyway into a global context, and I think it gives everyone the confidence that actually the solutions that we're putting in place and rolling out will stick around for some time, and that you can use them to drive collaborations not only in Europe but actually globally. It's been a really nice demo here from Alexander Senz from EBI, where you could, and I think this speaks a bit to the vision, where you could get data from the archive in UK through a secure line into a secure cloud in Finland, but you access this through your federated home institute identity. So it's a small step towards this sort of very shared vision, but I think we're moving towards them. As I said, I'm very happy that we put some national cohorts in beacons, and some more are in progress, and we're working essentially to tick off the national cohorts one by one in our 20 member states. So over time, we hope to bring them in. And I think that the fact that we've been able to extend to more complex queries, I think we start to see some interest from clinicians, so that's really great. Just wanted to show us as a roundup a project we've done with our Dutch partners where they've started to integrate this into their national translational IT infrastructure, which is covering most of the medical centers in the Netherlands. And based on these standards, they can submit the raw data to secure archives such as the EGA. They can use the process data on the national Transmart service, but they also have ways of using standardized Galaxy workflows on secure servers to pull the data in and expose new calculations to researchers. So I think this is a really good first example of where we want to move in this sort of shared space and linking in infrastructure. So with that, I'll thank you for your attention, and I think we'll take questions at the end, so thank you very much.